Andrea asks a question which I think a lot of people have absolutely no framework for because we live in an era of the collapse of marriage in our society. The complete sort of breakdown of the family unit that you were describing a moment ago, Dr. Peterson. And so Andrea asks, what is the secret to a healthy and happy marriage? I think it's actually a very well composed question, a healthy and happy marriage. Drew, start with you.
Yeah, I got 42 years, and my wife, and it's possible she's here tonight if she hasn't gotten up and gone home. But I used to answer that it was simple politeness, treating each other with kindness. But then I realized what I was really saying is that it's gratitude. It is gratitude for the invisible things that your spouse does for you every single day and does for you simply by existing, and including her and including him in your own achievements and in your own ego. My wife is as much a part of my ego as I am. Her pain is my pain. Her joy is my joy. I hope she feels that way about me. And I think that takes time to establish. And kindness and gratitude are the way to take that time until you're so much one entity that you just feel with each other and care so much for each other that you're there for one another when you need them.
Can we go around this way? Because I don't want to have to go after Jordan Peterson. Okay, good.
I'll allow it.
I think that's I think, actually, to be honest, I was going to say gratitude, so I actually have nothing to say now. I think a big key to a healthy marriage is to root out the spirit of competition in a marriage, because, or at least to channel it in a healthy way, because a lot of times, especially when you bring kids into the mix, you get into this competitive thing where it's like, well, I did this around the house, and I was up with the kid, in the middle of the night for X amount of hours, and you're not doing this, and you've got this scorecard, you're keeping score all the time, and that's why I think it's so toxic these days when you hear from people that, well, a marriage is supposed to be 50-50, to be 50-50 equal partners, and that's exactly the wrong approach, because then you're always measuring, well, I'm at 49 right now, and you're at 51. No, you both just give of yourselves 100%, and you don't worry about competition. And you channel the competition through board games in your marriage. You take the board games very seriously. My wife and I have just gone to bed angry at each other because of board games before.
Like the Bible says to do.
Yeah. That's okay, as long as it's for board games. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we banned board games in my house when my husband and I decided to play Scrabble, and we realized he had English spelling of words. So obviously honor is not spelled with a U. We're in America.
This is America.
This is America.
This is America.
Just saying that for the record. But I'm going to kind of say my last answer again and restate that the symbiotic nature of the masculinity and the femininity. I'm not trying to be my husband. My husband is not trying to be me. And especially when you have children, you realize how children really grow when they have both. The things that my husband is concerned with when it comes to our child are things that I don't even think twice of. He needs that maternity and that paternity. And it's just been beautiful to see how right the Bible is on absolutely everything.
Dennis, you have a unique perspective on this because you say that divorce is a mitzvah.
Is a what?
Well, that is actually, as Ben can attest to, it is a statement actually by the greatest Jewish commentator.
Dennis Prager.
Thank you. I will take it slightly differently. What to avoid rather than what to do. And there are two things that I think people need to avoid, and not in order of importance. One is taking the other for granted. I think that people should date for the rest of their lives. When you try to win that person to be your spouse, look at how much you did. Make sure how you looked, how you acted. Everything about you was, I want to win this person. Then you win that person, And then within a year or 10 years or 20 years, it all goes to hell. I stop trying to win this person. My favorite English verb is earn. It's one of the only languages in the world that has the word earn. In all Latin languages, you say, I win an income. In America, in English, you say, I earn. The other one is my happiness thesis, that you are not allowed to inflict your bad mood on others any more than you can inflict your bad breath on others. You are obligated to wash away your bad mood just as you wash away your bad breath.
Someone named Pam asked, what is a man? And I'm going to answer the question by going after Dr. Peterson.
Well, I actually don't think it's a good question. And I'll tell you why. I mean, I think happy is a pretty low goal. I mean, first of all, there's going to be lots of times in your marriage where you are seriously not happy. And sometimes that's going to be because you're having conflict with your partner, but sometimes it's going to be because all hell's broken loose around you. And then if you judge the success of your marriage on your happiness, then the same thing happens if you judge your success in life on the basis of your happiness. What do you have when it's nothing but suffering? And that's going to be plenty of your life. And so the whole orientation of that question in that sense is wrong. What you want to have in your marriage is, I would say, first and foremost, like a scrupulous honesty. And I don't just mean that you tell each other the truth, because you can be brutal with the truth. I mean the kind of honesty that's devoted towards thriving in love, you know? And you want to act nobly in your relationship. You want to be reliable and productive and generous and then if you're lucky, now and then, you might be happy. And you might have a clear enough conscience so that in those rare moments where you are truly happy, you can also enjoy it without guilt. And so you aim at something a lot higher than happiness, and then you welcome it if it deigns to land on you for brief moments of time. So.
I never figured you for a Catholic.
Yeah, well, I've got all the guilt, you know. It's not a stretch, man.
That is, that Catholic aspect is very important. In the Italian culture, there is a concept known as divorce Italian style. And divorce Italian style is when you murder your husband or wife because there's no other way to get out of the marriage. You are in it. And I actually think this is a very important thing. I mean, I'm half joking. I'm half joking. If I ever end up separated in my marriage, it will be at knife point by my wife. It will not be, because I think if you both go into a marriage agreeing on what it is, on what the institution is, and you say, look, we're in it, we're not going to leave it, this is, no matter how terrible and miserable it might seem at times, we're just going to be in it, for better or for worse. Yeah. That gives you a level of comfort and security and true freedom that will allow you to weather those storms. And you also don't need to pursue selflessness exactly. In a way, you're sort of pursuing the opposite. You're pursuing a sort of selfishness in that you are viewing your spouse as part of your flesh. A man and a woman leave their families. They come together in one flesh. I think of my wife, sweet little Elisa, truly as a part of my flesh. And so even when I do all sorts of very annoying behaviors, and Elisa yells at me and she says, Mike, do the dishes, go in there, clean up your clothing, why are you doing? You're working too late, why are you at Backstage on that, Mike? I think to myself that this is good. I need to accept this with saintly patience. This is very virtuous to do. And that last point that Jordan made, this is very important. That Catholic guilt is so good because in the good times you will be absolutely blissful in your marriage, but in the bad times, and this is true in all aspects of life, you know that suffering can be a sanctifying experience. And if you react to it in a way that is with patience and that is edifying and that is not merely complaining and debasing, that can be a wonderful thing. And even through difficult moments, that will bring you even closer together until your wife kills you in the end. And anyway, you had a good run.
So, like Michael, if my marriage ends, it will be because my wife murders me, both because she is a doctor and can get away with it, and and also because the life insurance money is just extraordinary. But, you know, to take, I think, something that hasn't been taken, it's hard to be the last person except for Jeremy, and who cares what Jeremy has to say? So one thing that I think people tend to fall prey to is that men tend to think that the things that their wife wants are the things that they would want, and women tend to think that the things their husband wants are the things that they would want. And failing to recognize that men and women are wildly different and have very different priorities leads to some pretty bad things. I have so many stories that are like, I mean, the purest example of this that I can think of is there's one time my wife came to me and she had some sort of problem, and I did what men do. I said, okay, so here's a bunch of solutions. And men, right?
Whoa.
Yeah, I see that, Candace. So that's correct.
Is it really a bad
It's a
idea?
bad idea.
Because men are solution-oriented, right? If they hear a problem, men like to fix things. They like machines. They like to fix things. And so my wife presented me with the problem, and I said the natural, normal, logical thing that men do. And I said, here's a solution, and she got mad. And I realized at that point that what she didn't want was a solution. What she wanted was for me to hear her.
Yes.
To hear her. Yes, the comfort. The emotion. Even I. And so at that point, we set up a rule in my home. And the rule goes like this. When my wife comes to me with a problem, I say to her, is this a solutions problem, or is this a conversation where you want me to hear you? And my wife has been kind enough, knowing my shortcomings, to actually abide by this rule and answer the question straight, that she doesn't actually want the problem solved. One other example of this sort of disconnect, because I think the truth is that I think that what women actually want, to speak for women as I'm an expert. I mean, I could be one. I mean, it could be anything. What women predominantly want is to be heard and protected by the man that they are with. They want to be heard, and they want to be understood, and they want to be protected by the man that they are with. And because that is the best characteristic about the husband and father. And what men want is respect, food, and sex. Those are the things that men want. It isn't that difficult. We're real simple. So all you ladies are like, man's a mystery. He's not a mystery. I promise you provide him all three of these things, and he will be a happy camper. My wife came to me at one point, and she said to me, she's on the phone with a person who shall remain nameless, a female friend of hers who shall remain nameless. And this woman, her husband, she'd been working a lot, and her husband had been working a lot, and she was in the middle of a very difficult work project, with a bunch of kids at home, and her husband would come home, and he'd be taking care of the kids. And he was getting grumpier and grumpier about this, as men are apt to do. And she was talking with my wife on the phone, and she said, what should I do? And my wife said, you should buy him some flowers, get him a card, tell him how much what he's doing means to you. And I motioned desperately, you need to, it was on speakerphone, which it shouldn't have been. And I motioned desperately to mute the phone. And she muted the phone. And I said, no, you need to bleep him. And I said to my wife, you're thinking like a woman would think, right? Because if you want to feel appreciated, you don't want that. What you want me to do is buy you some flowers and write you a card and talk about how wonderful you are and how grateful I am. And my wife, being a woman of good sense and practicality, nodded firmly, took off the mute, and said, go home and sleep with your husband. And it was good for the marriage, as it turns out.
Can I make a comment on all of this? I would just like to make a comment observing all of this. No, it's not what you expect. This whole dialogue would be inconceivable at any left-wing place. And the reason is we're real. They hate reality. None of this discussion, especially the last comment. No, I could prove it. This will take just literally under a minute. About 10 years ago, I wrote a column every week, so it's 20 years of columns. One year, I wrote a 2-part column on the subject of if you're if a wife is not in the mood. That's what it was, a 2-part column. And the whole thesis, which I put in such gentle phraseology.
Go home and bleep him.
If your husband is a good man, if you respect him, if he treats you beautifully, then don't only allow your mood to determine whether you sleep with him. That was the thesis of it. Of course, there are times when obviously that will determine, but not always. Just as mood cannot determine almost anything good that we do. I don't determine whether I go to work based on my mood. The Daily Kos wrote, headline, you can see it, it's still up there, Dennis Prager advocates marital rape.
Yeah.
They hate reality.
So one of the practices that my wife and I have that really helped us a tremendous amount more recently when we were both recovering from very serious illnesses is we had instituted a policy of regular dates. And probably 25 years ago, maybe longer, and that was at her impetus. I was resistant to the idea to begin with, but not for long. And yeah, and so to follow up on your comment, it's like, put in some bloody effort and get in the mood. Both of you, right? Both of you. Yeah. Because it's not, when you're exhausted with kids, when you've worked all day, and you're kind of up to here and you're tired, it's easy to drop the intimate part of your marriage to number 11 on a list of 10 priorities. And then that's just not a good long-term strategy. And so when you're an adult with adult responsibilities, you have to carve out the time and you have to make a willful effort. And as Dennis just pointed out, that's way too important to have it depend on something like unpredictable and arbitrary whim. And on the part of both partners.
Yeah.
So
Could I, the rules have totally broken down, so can I talk again? After listening, I just want to give one other, because after listening to all this, I feel like my answer should be more sexist, like the rest of you. So there's one other thing I think is really important, and this is advice to men in particular in marriage, and that is to stop bitching. Okay. Yeah. Now, the same advice could go to women, but there's no point. Like, no, why? But I think. You guys opened the floodgates, so I'm just jumping in. I think we've lost the sense of stoicism in men completely in marriages, and so now, because we encourage men to, be very open about your emotions, and what that ends up happening is that you just like dump all of this stuff onto your wife all the time, everything that you're worrying about, everything you're thinking about, and the idea that a man would just shoulder something in silence is it's considered offensive. No, you have to be open about your feelings. One of my favorite stories in the Gulag Archipelago, Solzhenitsyn.
A sentence that has never before been uttered.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories.
little anecdote.
By the way, this is a story that I told my brother the day before his wedding. I was his best man. So that's true. There's a man who's at a Soviet labor camp, and he's sentenced to die. And why are you guys laughing? Trying to tell a serious story. He's sentenced to be shot to death, but he wants to see his wife. I can't tell the story. I can't tell it. It's impossible. The point I'm trying to make is he's sentenced to die, but he wants to see his wife one last time, and so the prison guards tell him that we can send your wife to come see you, but the deal is you can't tell her what's about to happen to you, because if you tell her that, then maybe she ends up getting shot too. So he spends 3 days with his wife, just walking around this prison camp, and never tells her what's about to happen to him. He just spends time with her and shoulders this burden entirely on his own. And then as soon as she is sailing away on the ship, he's undressing to go before the firing line. You compare that to today when a man comes home like in tears, "What's wrong? I stubbed my toe," and it's just there's quite a contrast there, I think.
I agree that you need honesty in your marriage. Absolutely, you need honesty in all of your relationships, including your relationship with yourself, which is where most of the real lies happen in the world. But I think that, kind of to your point, Matt, I think that there's a difference between honesty as a general statement and honesty in the specifics. So, for example, I believe that the fantasy of marriage is part of what destroys so many marriages in the modern age. I don't want to live in a fantasy relationship with my wife. I want to live in a very real relationship with my wife. And so I don't want my wife, for example, to think a bunch of fanciful things about the foundations of our marriage. I don't want her to think, "I think you're the most beautiful woman in the world." I mean, Mila Kunis exists, and my wife knows that Mila Kunis exists. I don't believe my wife selected me on the basis that I'm the most beautiful man in the world.
Clearly.
In some ways, believing in those sort of fanciful notions actually diminishes the value of the choice that we make in selecting our spouse. And so I want my wife to know very, very truthfully what a man is, distinct from what a woman is, what the burdens of a man are, very distinct from what the burdens of a woman are. I don't want her to live in an illusion, and I don't want to live in an illusion. But I don't tell her every time that I think a waitress is hot. That's a very specific piece of information that is my burden to carry. I don't want her... I don't want her to think that I don't think waitresses are hot, right? I don't want her to think that men are the same as women, or that I'm better than I am. But I also don't want to burden her with all the particulars. And I think that's kind of part of what you're saying, is that we do have to carry part of this. I have a lot to say on the topic of marriage. I've had the honor of officiating 24 or more weddings, some for people who are here, people who are very dear to me, lifelong friends. I got to pastor a church for many, many years in Los Angeles. Even our friend Laurel, who's here today, I had the honor of marrying her to her husband. And so I've had the opportunity to think a lot about if you're going to take on the responsibility of officiating a wedding, you have an obligation to try to impart some pieces of wisdom to people before you do it. And a lot of it's very practical. Don't go tit for tat. Don't keep score. When you have to give each other the right to criticize one another. You can't navigate 40, 50, 60 years of life with someone who has no opportunity to criticize you. Men and women are different. You're going to have different needs. Don't try to place your reactions to something on them as though they mean what it would mean if you did the very same thing. I mean, these are very practical and I think very important, but there's a very spiritual component to it as well. And obviously the Bible has a great deal to say about it, but you can live in Ephesians for a long time talking about marriage, but there's a different idea that I'd like to leave the conversation with, which is that at the end of the day, and this is less directly stated in the Bible, but indirectly many, many times stated in the Bible, you have no real power over any other human being. If you do, it's not a God-given power. You have no right to the power that you have over them. You certainly can't change anyone for the better through coercion. You can't make someone what you want them to be. And yet there is a paradox which says, in any meaningful relationship, if you work on fulfilling your role to the best of your ability and beyond, if you work on bettering yourself, if you work on putting into a relationship all that you can, it's not a recipe that says, if you do this, it will change them. In fact, if you pursue it on that basis, it almost certainly will not work. But the paradox is, if you pursue it simply because it is the right thing to do, it has some mystical effect on the other. It's almost as though there's a God and he knows the heart of man, and he knows the difference between things that are motivated out of the good and things that are motivated out of only the selfish. And when you pursue being the best husband that you can be, it creates in your wife at least the opportunity for her to be the best wife that she can be. When you are the best wife that you can be, it creates in your husband the opportunity to be the best husband that he can be.
Very good.